Hey everybody, it's your boy, and today's video is going to be slightly different. It's the avatar that's returning because I look like crap and I don't really have the time to get ready and look good for the camera, and I don't think I've even charged it for a couple of days, so best not to risk that. So for now, it's going to be old school avatar usage, and the subject of today's video is going to be very different too. It's going to be essentially correcting somebody's sources, and the person that I am correcting is ShortFatOtaku, or Dev. He released a video that was, I hate to say it, not very good. Sorry Dev, it's not that good. About the capitalist case for universal healthcare. Yes, I know. For those of you in the audience, you're wondering, isn't that an oxymoron? Isn't that contradictory? Yes, it is, but that's besides the point. This video is not going to be debunking his entire argument. It is debunking a particular part of the video, which he thinks strengthens his case, but actually it weakens his case because he's fundamentally misread the quote, and that is that he's using F.A. Hayek as a source to defend universal healthcare from a so-called capitalist perspective. I will link the video in the description down below. It's towards the end he starts quoting Hayek, but since I have the Road to Serfdom with me anyway, I'm going to quote from the book, and I'm also going to give you the page number, which he didn't give you. He only said which book it came from, which is not how you cite your sources, Dev. Now, a bit of context to the book. This is a book that is essentially against central planning and an argument for the free market of spontaneous order. It is a warning that the more you centrally plan, the more the government takes over certain aspects of society, the more likely your country, your society, is going to turn totalitarian. It's an anti-totalitarianism book, which makes you wonder, why is Dev using this book in particular from Hayek to justify universal healthcare? Well, let's get the quote out, shall we? And this comes from a particular chapter called Security and Freedom. It's the age-old question, do you have more security or do you have more freedom? Because the two are actually mutually exclusive. If you have more security, you have less freedom. If you have more freedom, you have less security. And that is what Hayek is trying to grapple with in this chapter. This is yet more context behind this quote, and we will start one page just before. It's from 124 to about 125 on the Routledge edition. It will be well to contrast at the outset the two kinds of security: the limited one, which can be achieved for all, and which is therefore no privilege but a legitimate object of desire, and the absolute security which in a free society cannot be achieved for all, and which ought not to be given as a privilege, except in a few special instances, such as that of the judges, where complete independence is of paramount importance. These two kinds of security are, first, security against severe physical privation, the certainty of a given minimum of sustenance for all, and secondly, the security of a given standard of life, or of the relative position which one person or group enjoys compared with others, or, as we may put it briefly, the security of a minimum of income and the security of the particular income a person is thought to deserve. We shall presently see that this distinction largely coincides with the distinction between the security which can be provided for all outside of and supplementary to the market system, and the security which can be provided only for some and only by controlling or abolishing the market. There is no reason why, in a society that has reached the general level of wealth which ours has attained, the first kind of security should not be guaranteed to all without endangering general freedom. There are difficult questions about the precise standard which should thus be assured. There is particularly the important question whether those who thus rely on the community should indefinitely enjoy all the same liberties as the rest. An incautious handling of these questions might well cause serious and perhaps even dangerous political problems, but there can be no doubt that some minimum of food, shelter and clothing sufficient to preserve health and the capacity to work can be assured to everybody. Indeed, for a considerable part of the population of this country, this sort of security has long been achieved. This is the context. There are two types of security. There's the security that is provided more by the market, by spontaneous order, which guarantees to most people, if not all to some extent, a minimum standard. And then there is the other security which is provided from top down, which gets rid of the market. It is a authoritarian security. And then we get to the quote that Dev thinks supports universal healthcare. Nor is there any reason why the state should not assist the individuals in providing for those common hazards of life against which, because of their uncertainty, few individuals can make adequate provision, whereas in the case of sickness and accident, neither the desire to avoid such calamities nor the efforts to overcome their consequences are as a rule weakened by the provision of assistance, where, in short, we deal with genuinely insurable risks. the case for the state helping to organise a comprehensive system of social insurance is very strong. There are many points of detail where those wishing to preserve the competitive system and those wishing to supersede it by something different will disagree on the details of such schemes, and it is possible under the name of social insurance to introduce measures which tend to make competition more or less ineffective. But there is no incompatibility in principle between the state providing greater security in this way and the preservation of individual freedom. To the same category belongs also the increase of security through the state rendering assistance to the victims of such acts of God as earthquakes and floods. Wherever communal action can mitigate disasters against which the individual can neither attempt to guard himself nor make provision for the consequences, such communal action should undoubtedly be taken. Where in that quote does Hayek even suggest that universal healthcare is okay and is in any way compatible with freedom, and in particular market freedom, competition and such like? He's talking about the state offering insurance as opposed to healthcare. So you pay into a pot, and then that pot will be used to pay a hospital if you need surgery or any kind of checkup. That is what private security does. That's why when you go to Bupa or any one of these private insurance companies, you pay them money so that you can use that money to then get an operation or God knows what else. Hayek is not even arguing for universal healthcare. He's not really even arguing for social insurance. He's just saying in principle there is no contradiction between that and freedom, although it may, which it probably well does, inhibit competition. Now let's find out what Hayek actually thought about universal healthcare, and this is from a much later book called The Constitution of Liberty. Unfortunately for Dev, Hayek doesn't actually agree with social insurance, and indeed he calls it essentially a scam. If initially it was chiefly efficiency that was stressed in support of the single compulsory organisation, there were other considerations clearly also present in the minds of its advocates from the beginning. There are in fact two distinct, though connected aims which a governmental organisation with coercive powers can achieve, but which are beyond the reach of any agency operating on business limits. A private agency can offer only specific services based on contract, that is, it can provide only for a need which will arise independently of the deliberate action of the beneficiary and which can be ascertained by objective criteria, and it can provide in this manner only for foreseeable needs. However far we extend any system of true insurance, the beneficiary will never get more than satisfaction of a contractual claim, i.e., he will not get whatever he may be judged to need according to his circumstances. A monopolistic government service, on the other hand, can act on the principle of allocation according to need, irrespective of contractual claim. Only such an agency with discretionary powers will be in a position to give individuals whatever they ought to have, or make them do whatever they ought to do to achieve a uniform social standard. It will also be in a position, and this is the second chief point, to redistribute income among persons or groups as seems desirable. Although all insurance involves a pooling of risks, private competitive insurance can never effect a deliberate transfer of income from one previously designated group of people to another. Such a redistribution of income has today become the chief purpose of what is called social insurance, a misnomer even in the early days of these schemes. When in 1935 the United States introduced the scheme, the term insurance was retained by a stroke of promotional genius, simply to make it more palatable. From the beginning it had little to do with insurance, and has since lost whatever resemblance to insurance it may ever have had. The same is now true of most of those countries which originally started with something more closely akin to insurance. Though a redistribution of incomes was never the avowed initial purpose of the apparatus of social security, it has now become the actual and admitted aim everywhere. No system of monopolistic compulsory insurance has resisted this transformation into something quite different, an instrument for the compulsory redistribution of income. The ethics of such a system, in which it is not a majority of givers who determine what should be given to the unfortunate few, but a majority of takers who decide what they will take from wealthy minority, will occupy us in the next chapter. At the moment, we are concerned only with the process by which an apparatus originally meant to relieve poverty is generally being turned into a tool of egalitarian redistribution. Not looking good so far, Dev, is it? It's looking as if social insurance is something that Hayek doesn't actually agree with, especially when it becomes monopolistic and is not subservient to the market. But let's turn to universal healthcare, the main topic of this discussion. What does he actually believe? The provision against sickness presents not only most of the problems which we have already considered, but peculiar ones of its own. They result from the fact that the problem of need cannot be treated as though it were the same for all who satisfy certain objective criteria, such as age. Each case of need raises problems of urgency and importance which have to be balanced against the cost of meeting it. Problems which must be decided either by the individual or for him by somebody else. There is little doubt that the growth of health insurance is a desirable development, and perhaps there is also a case for making it compulsory, since many who could thus provide for themselves might otherwise become a public charge. But there are strong arguments against a single scheme of state insurance, and there seems to be an overwhelming case against a free health service for all. From what we have seen of such schemes, it is probable that their inexpediency will become evident in the countries that have adopted, although political circumstances make it unlikely that they can ever be abandoned now that they have been adopted. One of the strongest arguments against them is indeed that their introduction is the kind of politically irrevocable measure that will have to be continued, whether it proves a mistake or not. The case for a free health service is usually based on two fundamental misconceptions. They are, first, the belief that medical needs are usually of an objectively ascertainable character and such that they can and ought to be fully met in every case without regard to economic considerations, and second, that this is economically possible because an improved medical service normally results in a restoration of economic effectiveness or earning power and so pays for itself. Both contentions mistake the nature of the problem involved in most decisions concerning the preservation of health and life. There is no objective standard for judging how much care and effort are required in a particular case. Also, as medicine advances, it becomes more and more clear that there is no limit to the amount that might profitably be spent in order to do all that is objectively possible. Moreover, it is also not true that in our individual valuation, all that might yet be done to secure health and life has an absolute priority over other needs. As in all other decisions in which we have to deal not with certainties but with probabilities and chances, we constantly take risks and decide on the basis of economic considerations whether a particular precaution is worthwhile, i.e. by balancing the risk against other needs. Even the richest man will normally not do all that medical knowledge makes possible to preserve his health, perhaps because other concerns compete for his time and energy. Somebody must always decide whether an additional effort and additional outlay of resources are called for. The real issue is whether the individual concerned is to have a say and be able, by an additional sacrifice, to get more attention, or whether this decision is to be made for him by somebody else. Though we all dislike the fact that we have to balance immaterial values like health and life against material advantages and wish that the choice were unnecessary, we all do have to make the choice because of facts we cannot alter. The conception that there is an objectively determinable standard of medical services which can and ought to be provided for all, a conception which underlies the beverage scheme and the whole British National Health Service, has no relation to reality. In a field that is undergoing as rapid change as medicine is today, it can at most be the bad average standard of service that can be provided equally for all. But since in every progressive field, what is objectively possible to provide for all depends on what has already been provided for some, the effect of making it too expensive for most to get better than average service must, before long, be that this average will be lower than it otherwise would be. The problems raised by a free health service are made even more difficult by the fact that the progress of medicine tends to increase its efforts not mainly toward restoring working capacity, but toward the alleviation of suffering and the prolongation of life. These, of course, cannot be justified on economic, but only on humanitarian grounds. Yet while the task of combating the serious diseases which befall and disable some in manhood is a relatively limited one, the task of slowing down the chronic processes which must bring about the ultimate decay of all of us is unlimited. The latter presents a problem which can, under no conceivable condition, be solved by an unlimited provision of medical facilities, and which therefore must continue to present a painful choice between competing aims. Under a system of state medicine, this choice will have to be imposed by authority upon the individuals. It may seem harsh, but it is probably in the interest of all that under a free system, those with full earning capacity should often be rapidly cured of a temporary and not dangerous disablement at the expense of some neglect of the aged and mortally ill. Where systems of state medicine operate, we generally find that those who could be promptly restored to full activity have to wait for long periods because all the hospital facilities are taken up by people who will never again contribute to the needs of the rest. There are so many serious problems raised by the nationalisation of medicine that we cannot mention even all the more important ones, but there is one, the gravity of which the public has scarcely yet perceived, and which is likely to be of the gravest importance. This is the inevitable transformation of doctors, who have been members of a free profession primarily responsible to their patients, into paid servants of the state, officials who are necessarily subject to instruction by authority and who must be released from the duty of secrecy so far as authority is concerned. The most dangerous aspect of the new development may well prove to be that, at a time when the increase in medical knowledge tends to confer more and more power over the minds of men to those who possess it, they should be made dependent on a unified organisation under single direction and be guided by the same reasons of state that generally govern policy. A system that gives the indispensable helper of the individual, who is at the same time an agent of the state and insight into the other's most intimate concerns, creates conditions in which he must reveal this knowledge to a superior and use it for the purposes determined by authority, opens frightening prospects. The manner in which state medicine has been used in Russia as an instrument of industrial discipline gives us a foretaste of the uses to which such a system can be put. Well, there you go. He's completely against it, in more ways than one. He's just resigned to the fact that, unfortunately, from the 1960s up until now, we're probably going to be saddled with universal healthcare that doesn't work, which gives us many totalitarian fears. Some have been realised due to the pandemic. Yet Dev thinks that Hayek is some kind of source which enables him to justify his belief that universal healthcare has a capitalist basis, that there's an argument for it, when Hayek literally dislikes the very notion of it for many different reasons. It's very clear that Dev has not done his reading about Hayek. He simply read The Road to Serfdom, saw this particular passage, and just removed it from all context because he didn't know what social insurance meant in the 1940s and even now, and assumed that he must have been talking about universal healthcare when he wasn't, but was actually talking about something completely different, namely something that encompasses not just healthcare, but also provision for retirement, provision for unemployment, etc, etc. But in that particular passage, he was of course mentioning the more healthcare side of things, but it's pretty clear that he's not talking about universal healthcare, and it's not his preferred system. He just says, in principle, in theory, it may be okay and may not conflict with freedom, but actually, it turns out, after many years, admittedly, it does. If Dev was going to use Hayek, he should really have read The Road to Serfdom in its full context and thought about, does this actually help my argument? Which it doesn't. He should have looked up what social insurance actually is, and he should have read the Constitution of Liberty, which is something that's far more complete in regards to what Hayek actually thinks about what should be done in society. So there you go, Dev, you've been debunked. Hayek was not somebody who supported universal healthcare. You have fundamentally misrepresented him to your audience, and I think you need to retract that, because you've made an utter mistake. It's terrible what you've just done. This is terrible. You've not done your due diligence. You've done the complete opposite, in fact. You've made him look like a sock dem when he was anything but. But anyway, until next time, guys, it's been your boy, and I'll see you all later.